when I was getting ready for this, I asked my husband what I should do for the introduction, and he said that I should talk about myself. And my 6-year-old daughter said I should tell a joke. So I'm going to do both, just so that you guys can get to know me a little bit. I'm going to start with the joke, so bear with me. This is my 6-year-old daughter's favorite joke. Knock, knock. Dwayne. Dwayne the bathtub. So I can tell her that I did this. My name is Irina. I am a mom of 2 kids. I have a 6-year-old and a 12-month-old. And before I became a mom, for 15 years, I worked in the financial services industry, hence why this is the topic that I was asked to talk to you about today. I have a little handout here as far as, if you wanted to take a few notes, take a look at it. Money is an infinitely complex subject, and one that we talk about a lot. Sometimes too much, but often also not enough, at least not in a way that is beneficial or edifying. And that's my goal today. I'd like to discuss who's in charge of your money. We can look at a little bit about how the Bible talks about it. It does talk about it a lot. And I also would like to share some practical and sensible things around the subject. And then after everything, we'll have some time for Q&A. There is so much that we can talk about money. It's complex. You can keep digging and digging, and you're going to find out so much information. But if I start talking about it right away without addressing kind of the biblical point of view, it would be a waste of time for us, because you can read so many books on the subject. If you go to the library, the self-help on the section for money is extremely long. But if we take the finances in isolation of their intended purpose, it will inevitably become an idol. It will control you. Whether it's in overspending, obsessively saving, researching, becoming greedy, you can spend an entire lifetime earning, learning, doing all the right things, and still completely miss the point. Which is why it would be irresponsible not to remember what God has said on the subject. So, who is in control of your finances? Is it you, your husband? Maybe it's your greed or the desire to show everyone how perfect your family is, how much money you make, or does it feel like your money is so out of control that you're scared to open your bank statements or your credit card statements? Because that can happen too. Is there a chance that you don't think you can be truly happy unless your family ends up in a house that's the same size, at least, as your rich friend? So let me tell you this. Money, fears, anxiety, and desires aren't really about money at all. Those are issues of the heart. And you'll never use your money in a way that was intended until you realize that really it's not about money and it's not about you at all. And the quote I have from Paul David Tripp here that's also on the handout is, handling money right, being in control of it, not being controlled by it, and not asking it to do for you what it was never intended to do, requires examining a worldview that should shape how we think about money and everything else in our lives. You can't understand money if you don't understand who you are. And money is one of the main ways you demonstrate who you think you are, how you spend it. There's no better indicator of identity that you assigned yourself than how you use your money. Jesus talks about money more than many other topics for this exact reason, and he knows that our identity is wrapped up in it. So it's a reflection of how we see ourselves, how we see the world, and where our values lie. On the other hand, if you think biblically about your identity, you can live righteously when it comes to money. So what is our identity when it comes to our finances? There's 2 things to remember. One is we are God's creation for his purpose. God made you, he made me, and the world that we live in. Even the idea of currency is God's. So using our money in a way that you want is a sort of denial for his purpose for our lives. And number 2 is we're all sinners. We're broken, our hearts are cunning, and our money problems are first moral, and then everything else. So if we behave as if we are not in sin, and if our money has nothing to do with that, we will continue to make mistakes. However, our hope is in Christ, and he has grace and forgiveness for us. So our wisdom comes from him alone. And there's a lot of suffering when it comes to money in different situations, no matter how much of it you have. In Romans 8, it says, "For I consider that suffering of the present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected in hope, that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain freedom in the glory of the children of God." So who is in charge of your money? What do you consider when you make decisions about your finances? And which identity is it wrapped in? So I hope that if you signed up for this session and you have some shame or regrets about decisions that you've made in the past, understand the infinity of grace. Jesus wraps us up, forgives us, and allows us to try again. And this is a chance to reset. You can't do that without understanding your identity first. So I'm not assuming everyone's in a desperate situation, but if you feel desperation or shame or guilt, or if you feel like you need to change something, just know that God has infinite love and grace for us. And he promises not just forgiveness, but eternal life. And we can commit to using our money according to God's purpose. And if we fail, we don't need to give in to desperation, humiliation, or depression, because we have his promises. I would highly recommend a book by Paul David Tripp. It's called Redeeming Money. He does a really great job about talking on this subject specifically. When I read it, it felt like a series of sermons, so I don't know if maybe that's where the book came from. And if you feel like your money problems lie in the heart, this book does a really great job of addressing that. And I also want to say that please don't think that I'm speaking as someone who has everything figured out, because I definitely don't. Preparing for this talk definitely exposed a lot of my own sins, misplaced priorities, anxieties, in some parts laziness, so and identity issues as well. So I just ask you that let's do this together. This is the book is Redeeming Finances by Redeeming, is it Finances or Money? Redeeming Money by Paul David Tripp. I also have another book in the recommendations on the bottom of the second page. And speaking of that book, this is probably my favorite quote from there. "Your money future is not determined by the level of your discipline, insight, or ingenuity alone, because God blesses you every day with his infinite wisdom and limitless power. As one of God's saints, when it comes to money, you are not hopeless or helpless, because the author of reliable hope is the source of true help and is now your Father." So we talked about identity. In the next section, I'd like to talk a little bit about contentment and generosity. And then our longest section, we're going to talk about just some practical money advice that I have. Basically, my plan is to share with you the same way I would share with a really good friend. And that's kind of how I'm thinking about this session today. So, are you happy? If God is the source of everything you have, are we happy with what we were given? In Philippians 4:11, it says, "I'm not speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content." And in 1 Timothy 6:6, Paul says, "But godliness with contentment is great gain." Paul was writing as an old man to Timothy, something that he learned himself. So contentment is a learned skill. It's not something that magically comes down upon us. It's something to be practiced and learned, no matter the circumstances. And we all have our own circumstances that God has put us with. And so how is contentment relevant to our talk today? Well, our view of happiness, what it is, how to achieve it, and where to get it, colors our entire worldview. Therefore, contentment has much more to do with finances than our actual salaries. Love of money pushes out the love of God as the chief motivator of the heart. So I won't struggle with just how to properly use money on the things I can buy. I will struggle with the kinds of other evils. So you can't have yourself at the center and not end up with a life that is evil in the eyes of God. And that's in general. That's not just when it comes to finances. So there was a woman who had perfect everything. She had the perfect husband, the perfect body. She lived in a perfect climate. And you may have guessed, I'm talking about Eve. And as she talked to the devil, she realized something for the very first time, that she didn't actually have everything. There was one thing that God told her she could not have. And the whole time she was listening to God, she was content. But as soon as she listened to the devil, she decided that there was something she didn't have. And we all, unfortunately, as humans, inherited this problem in our society. And that same problem is the bread and butter of advertising. A few years ago, it seemed like the entire world, like everyone I knew, discovered the Instant Pot. If you didn't have one, did you even cook? And, turns out pressure cookers have been around since like the 1600s, but 3 years ago, it was like everyone had to have one. Well, in June, the Instant Pot brand filed for bankruptcy. And can you guess why? Because everyone is buying air fryers. So that kind of gives us an idea of this is how our society works, how our world works. And just again, speaking about advertising, studies suggest that people see anywhere between 4,000 and 10,000 ads a day. Depending on how much time you spend online and social media, that's more ads than a few centuries ago somebody would see in their entire life. And the reason that we see this many ads is because they work. They make people money because they work, because we allow ourselves to be convinced that this next thing is going to make us happy until we get to the next thing. So people buy into the idea that whatever the next thing is, an Instant Pot, a Peloton bike, a bigger house, cosmetic procedures, designer clothes, they think it will make them happier. But we all know that's not true, because we know what our identity is and the true source of happiness and where it comes from. And yet, we still struggle. And right now, if you're realizing that your money problems might stem from discontent, repent in your heart. Ask Christ for help and start anew with a grateful heart. If the source of your issues is discontentment, just admit it and start afresh. You might find that learning to be content, growing in contentment, will not just improve your financial situation, maybe, or it can also build your relationship with others, especially maybe your spouse, so it can improve on that. Paul gives us a lot of hope here. Again, in Philippians 4:11, not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. And things that set us up for heart money problems, just quickly: ingratitude, false sense of need, discontentment, and envy. The love of money is not an overspending problem. It is a contentment problem. 1 Timothy 6:6, but godliness with contentment is great gain, for we have brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of this world. The discontented person, he thinks that he deserves more than he was given. It's also a humility problem, a lifestyle unshaped by what somebody called the unholy trinity. my needs, my wants, my feelings. The love of money also can push out the love for God and as a motivation. So we wouldn't struggle with just a proper use of money and the things it can buy. I will then struggle with all kinds of other evils. We simply cannot have ourselves in the center and end up with a life that is not evil in the eyes of God. A word about tithing, since we're talking about hearts and we're talking about our spending reflecting our values. How you spend your money reflects that, reflects who you are, how you think about yourself. So I challenge you today to relook at your priorities if you are not tithing or if you have stopped tithing to your church body. A better budget, a higher paying job, a change of lifestyle will not fix the root cause. Finding our identity in Christ, seeing the beauty of his grace and gospel will bring forth the changes first and then change our habits later. So now that we've talked about priorities, who's in charge, let's talk about some recommendations for financial health. These guidelines have been used for decades by financial professionals. They are not original to me. They're designed to help people think about their futures. Kind of if you don't know what you should be focusing on, this is very, very generic. It's probably not for everyone. It's probably not good for everyone, depending on your life situation. So I'm just going to go through them really, really fast. You can find somebody who specializes in each of these areas, probably at our church. There's a lot of people you can ask for more information in Q&A or come up to me later. And one more thing before I get into the details is if you decide to make any major financial changes in your life, you have to do it together with your spouse because it's important for your family to really dig down and understand what your priorities are, what your values are, pray and work through a budget that will serve your family and the Lord. This talk here should be really a starting point or maybe idea, education. It's not an exact prescription for anyone or even for how exactly your family should be allocating your funds. And for those who are single or engaged, I would encourage you to talk to the person you're dating about money. Do it all of the time. If you're struggling with this conversation when you're newly in love, it will not get easier when you are experiencing really, really difficult times in your marriage. If you have debt, if you have spending problems, if you have really bad credit, admit to it to the other person. And it's 100% appropriate for you to expect that he does that as well. I promise that starting on that note will make your life easier down the road. And just another little piece of advice, if you are newly married, if possible, try to live off of one income if you can afford it at the start. It will prevent lifestyle creep, which I can explain later, and it will allow your life to start with a cushion instead of instantly living on a double income and then robbing yourself of future security. So when my husband and I got married, we both had jobs, and we decided to live off of one income. And because of this, we were able to pay off his student loans, save for a down payment on our home, and then when our daughter was born, we decided that I would stay at home. And that took the pressure off of him as the only provider because we were already used to living off of his paycheck. And we couldn't save at the same rate, or obviously we were not bringing in as much money, but we already had a safety net and it was less stressful. And if you are newlywed and you can't live off one income, try doing 1.5 or 1 3/4, and then just save that portion of your money. And that will give you a really good foundation financially in the first few years to start off with. So what are some steps that we should consider to become financially secure? Again, these are not my original ideas. They're just kind of standards in the financial industry. So if you were to talk to a financial planner, this is really the generic basics. The first one is understand your spending and then build a budget. So look at 2 months of your spending. Look at every single dollar that you've spent and where it went. You can use a tool like mint.com. You need a budget. There's a few other ones where you can download all of your credit card and bank statements or like bank information into, and they will build out a chart that shows you like where you spend your money. Another one is you can do a spreadsheet and then just track everything. Like if you're the kind of person that saves every receipt, that's even more accurate than like an online tool. Just depends on kind of how much you want to dedicate to this, how nitty-gritty you want to get. If you're not honest with yourself about where your funds are going, like if you're thinking, where did my paycheck go? Or like, how are we paycheck to paycheck every month? You need to dig down and examine, and then after that, you can make a budget. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be incredibly detailed. There's tons of different ways of doing it. Start with something, and then you can work through it and figure it out over time what works for your family. And you can use those same tools that I mentioned to kind of figure out where you're spending your money to build a budget as well. Okay, so you're sitting down to pay your bills or make your budget. What should you include? Or if you're really struggling to make ends meet, what are the priorities with that paycheck? The first thing that should get covered, I think these are pretty basic. Of course, your rent or mortgage, right? You need a roof over your head. Second, your kids and your family or yourself, you need food and groceries. Thirdly, cover your utilities, and then make at least the minimum payments on your credit. After that, your tithing, followed by your non-essential bills, and then anything that's left should go to build an emergency fund. So let's talk about emergency funds. Depending on your financial situation or your employment, the number you need in that emergency fund will vary. So if you have a W-2 job that's the same every single time, and you have a job that's easy to like find a new one, 2 months is probably enough. But if your work is seasonal, if you're self-employed, if you have periods where you earn like commissions, you might need 6 months. So that if you're like really specialized where it takes a long time for you to find a new job, it might require moving, you need more in that emergency fund to kind of get you through that time of need or anything like that. So your family can be secure and feel like you can get through that. The second thing is employer matching retirement accounts. So if you are working for an employer, if you're not self-employed, 401k contributions, and if you know what that is, if your employer offers a matching contribution and you're not taking advantage of it, you are literally just saying no thank you to money. Because when they are offering you a salary, they're assuming that you are taking that matching percentage. So if they're saying, okay, we will match 3% of your salary that you put in to your 401k, which is a pretty standard number, and you are not doing that, you're like giving yourself a smaller salary that your employer is assuming. You're letting them keep that money. This is kind of a list of priorities, right? So you've filled up your emergency fund, you're doing at least the minimum in your 401k. You want to pay off debt. When it comes to credit cards, there's a different way of thinking about how they should be paid off. If you carry a credit card from month to month, you need to very seriously relook at your situation and work on paying them off as soon as possible. I usually recommend starting with the credit card that has the lowest balance and working your way up because you can build the momentum, and that's usually pretty satisfying and motivating. Like if you pay off a credit card that has $300 and then more and more and more and up to the one that is the most difficult to pay off, you will get motivated. Some people recommend starting with the one with the highest rate. They're all really high rates, but you can decide which way you want to do it. And then just for a second to talk about car loans. So if somebody asks me, what is the greatest theft of potential security to people in the middle class? I would say that it's often their car payments. So I actually, the only illustration I have, I put that on the worksheet. So look at the numbers. If a family has 2 brand new cars in their driveway, that's very likely that they are paying $1,500 a month or about $18,000 a year for those cars. That's a lot of money. And so if you have the ability to buy a car that's used, again, this applies to maybe not everyone, but if you're able to not borrow or buy cheaper cars that you can afford, you can save a lot of money that way. So you could have $18,000 extra a year if you saved up and paid cash up front for your car. Things like cars, boats, RVs, other kinds of toys are depreciating assets. And what that means is they go down in value over time, unlike your house. And any loans on these means that bank is taking your money and keeping it, while the thing that you purchased is going down in value. And often when car rates are really high, you owe more on your car than you can sell it for. So even if you tried to get rid of your car, you will still owe money. So it's a very dangerous trap, especially for people who buy used cars with bad credit. The rates can be the percentage can be in 30+%. And oftentimes those dealers make more money off of the loans than selling you the car. And they're not actually interested in you making these payments because then they can repossess it and sell it again. And so people who are making very little money, who have bad credit, they just get trapped in these terrible car loans. So that's the next thing after your car loans, I would say, is education loans. These loans are the lowest priority because they often have lower rates, and they're usually pretty easy to defer if you're in a difficult financial situation, or you can request a lower payment depending on your family size and things like that. So those are more flexible to deal with. So let's say you don't have any loans and any credit cards. Then there's saving for retirement and college education. If you paid off your debt, if you have your emergency fund taken care of, investing in an IRA and opening a college saving account for your kids should be your next priority. I won't go into too much detail on this. There's a lot of professionals who can help you with this, answer questions. You can ask me as well. I can share some knowledge. And then you can have a savings account for other large projects. Like if you're contributing monthly to your 401k, if your savings account is in a good place, your emergency account, but you want to remodel, save up for your next car, take a really big vacation, you can have a separate savings account for that once you feel like you're in a good place with the other things. So that's kind of it for the kind of building if you wanted to have a perfect scenario. There's a few things I wanted to mention. Something called lifestyle creep, also known as lifestyle inflation. It is a phenomenon that occurs when, as more resources are spent toward a standard of living, former luxuries become perceived necessities. So research shows that once somebody gets a raise, even a significant raise, they only experience like good feelings from it for about 3 months. And that's mostly because of lifestyle creep. So think of a time when you made a lot less than you do now. Do you sometimes wonder, how did we make ends meet? Like, how did we eat? That's probably, there's inflation, but also actual inflation, not lifestyle creep. But also lifestyle creep is dangerous because it grows silently and slowly, usually, but sometimes quickly. And it makes saving difficult as your income increases. Suddenly you realize that you're going out to eat, you're buying different clothes, you have fancier cars, and even though you're making more money than ever before, you have nothing left between paychecks. So another thing that I find very interesting is comes from a story about a French philosopher named Denis Diderot. He lived basically his entire life in poverty, like most philosophers even today. But that changed in 1765. Diderot's name was well known because he was the co-founder and writer of the encyclopedia in France, and it was basically the most the most comprehensive one at the time. And Catherine the Great, the Empress of Russia, heard that he was in financial troubles, and so she offered to buy his library for what today would be about $60,000. Suddenly, he had money to spare. Shortly after he had his little fortune, he bought a new scarlet robe. At the time, men wore these like dressing gowns, right? They were shiny and silky and felt good. And he brought it home, and he realized the rest of his clothes were so gross. Because this robe was beautiful and shiny, and it looked so good, and his suits and all of his other clothes were cringy and out of style. And so what did he do? He went back to the tailor, and he got a new wardrobe. And when he got his new clothes from the tailor, he realized his furniture was really ugly too. So what did he do? He went and he got a new rug, and he bought some new furniture. And guess what? He ran out of money really, really fast, because he started comparing his existing possessions to his beautiful new robe, and nothing else matched it. So the Diderot effect is what it's called, because when he ran out of money, he wrote an essay, which is his most famous work right now, not his encyclopedia or anything else. The Diderot effect states that obtaining a new possession often creates a spiral of consumption, which leads you to acquire more and more new things. As a result, we end up buying things that our previous selves never needed to feel happy or fulfilled. So I thought that was a pretty interesting, it's a pretty interesting thing to have a name for that we have all experienced. For me, I have a room where I found this cute rug, and I ended up changing everything about it. Yeah, I found a new rug, and then I needed some pictures, and then I needed some new things. So that I've experienced that in my life. So a few tips, again, I'm not making any assumptions but these are things that I have shared with friends before that have helped them. So these are just general kind of random tips to share. If you're struggling with controlling your spending, on sale is not saving money. If you're buying something that you were not planning on purchasing when you walked into the store, you're not saving money, you're spending it. Every time you pick up something that wasn't on your list, remind yourself that it wasn't on your list, and see if you still want it. One thing that I do is I don't put it in my cart, and if I still feel like it when I'm on the other end of Target or wherever I'm at, if I want to walk back to get it, maybe I'll get it. If I don't feel like walking back to get it, I probably didn't need it anyway. Another thing is retail therapy. It's not a thing, you guys. It's harmful. If you have free time, just don't go to the store. Go on a walk, call your friends, or if it's raining, like go out for a cup of coffee. It will be cheaper and better and more fulfilling for your soul to meet a friend than it would be to go shopping by yourself. And if going to coffee for me, going to coffee seems like such a big deal because I have 2 little kids, just invite them over to your house. They won't care if it's messy. They'll just enjoy your company. And it's still going to be better than feeling guilty for spending something or accidentally buying something. Another tip is don't apply for store credit cards. They really make you feel like you're going to save so much money. It's a trap. They have really high interest rates. And the balances grow because, it's not the same as like your bank statement. And often it can get out of control really easily, especially if you have lots of them, right? Another thing is, and this one is, I learned from my own experience is don't save your credit card on the website when you're shopping online. So I can tell you that I have saved thousands of dollars because I'm too lazy to go get my wallet from downstairs. So if I don't feel like going downstairs to get my wallet out of my purse, I don't really want it. I have so many abandoned carts in my online because I have a baby, and often if I am nursing and she's on my lap, of course, maybe you check out some websites. And if you don't feel like getting your wallet after you're done, maybe that was the fun. And the last thing I want to say, and just bear with me on this one, okay? Anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. Anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. What do I mean? If you're feeling discouraged, like you'll never be able to be in control of your money, do not strive for perfection. Here's an example that is not financial that I struggled with for a long time. When I was single, I had this massive study Bible, and I did these ambitious Bible reading plans, right? Like 10 chapters a day. And then I journaled, and I had a book that I was always reading. And it was very, like, it had a vibe or an aesthetic or whatever the young people call it. It was very cute, and there's highlighters involved. But that's not realistic for me right now as a mom. And so it can be very discouraging when you don't have that perfect, you're not doing it perfectly like you imagined it in your head. Or if it's not instantly kind of what you want it to be. So I had to let go of that perfect image and realize that reading the Bible on my phone while either nursing my baby or listening to the Bible when I go to drop off my daughter to school and back is so much better than nothing at all. Right? So I'm not doing the 10 chapters a day with the highlighters in the journal and the extra book, but I am still receiving the Word of God. So anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. Another example is like is that you can use this for is brushing your teeth. You know, it's better to brush your teeth at least once a day if you can't do it twice a day. I don't know, it's just another one. But it's a good example, right? Like if you can't get it perfect, at least do it some. Losing weight. Do not let perfectionism stop you from trying. That's kind of what this idea is, and I am a recovering perfectionist, so sometimes if I can't get it right, I don't want to do it at all. So I want to encourage you to don't be a perfectionist. Start somewhere. You're gonna fail. There's no one except for you knows about what's going on, or your spouse. Try again. If you can't build a safety net with 6 months of income because that's what you think you should have, start with saving one paycheck. If you're drowning in debt, pay off the credit card that has the lowest balance. See yourself do that. Start there. Or if you are struggling with having too much coffee or going out to eat too often, and that's kind of spiraling out of control, and that's where a lot of your money is going, and you're realizing you're doing it X number of times a week, just cut out one. Don't stop everything at once. See yourself progress, and ask God for help. Ask for forgiveness from your husband if you need to. Work together, encourage each other. We've talked a lot about many things, so let's take a quick look back at the things we talked about. We know that money was given to us by God, and we should align our priorities with His will and principles. We know that we're sinners, and we can only achieve these goals through His mercy and love, and we also talked about the different ideas as well. This is the end of my chat. I have some resources that I put on the bottom of the worksheet there. The book Redeeming Money by Paul David Tripp. Disciplines of a Godly Woman. It's not a book specifically on finances, but it's a really great book that made a big difference in my life. And it does have, I think, a chapter on finances as well. And then I would, with some asterisks, would recommend Dave Ramsey's redeeming money. There's some things about his ideas that I don't necessarily agree with, but if you find yourself drowning in debt where it's really, really bad, he can be a good wake-up call. But again, I have some things that I don't necessarily, like if you are very interested, you can ask me specifically. But that one is, I recommend it with reservations. Anyway, with that, any questions?